LLC asset protection probably doesn't work the way you think it does. There's actually two ways for LLC asset protection to work, and the second way you probably haven't ever heard of. Your LLC asset protection is almost like a double-sided shield. It works two ways to protect your personal assets and your business assets. Let's find out how. Quick LLC test for you today. If a business lawsuit gets filed against you, is it going to get filed against you personally or your company? That's going to depend on where your assets are at. Let's find more about that today. One of the biggest traps in LLC formation is forgetting to properly contribute assets to the LLC and leaving them in your personal name. Today, you'll find out why. When you form an LLC, there's two important buckets for assets to go in: personal assets and LLC assets. Let's find out what the difference is and why it's important. A lot of people think, I can just start my LLC and I'm good to go. However, especially if you've had a business already running and you have contracts, equipment, trucks, employees, anything like that, if you don't properly contribute those assets to the LLC, you may have a problem. And likewise, the LLC may not correctly protect those assets, and vice versa, may not protect your personal assets. An LLC's main liability shield that everyone knows about is the one where the LLC, if you run it properly, protects your personal assets from liability. So if you have a bunch of business assets in your personal name, those assets might not be protected. And then on the flip side, there's another type of asset protection that a lot of people don't know about. And the LLC can actually protect the LLC's assets from your personal creditors in case anything does pop up that way as well. Here's the part that really matters. Business assets should be in the name of the LLC. Personal assets should be in your name personally. That way, the dual liability protection that your LLC provides you can properly protect both sides of those assets. So in today's video, I'm going to walk through 5 things. Number 1, why forming your LLC doesn't automatically get you to the finish line. Number 2, what assets need to be contributed and where, and also what happens if they don't get properly contributed. Number 3, the most commonly forgotten or commonly skipped over assets that need to be contributed to your LLC. Number 4, how courts and creditors might treat these things if they see that you haven't set it up correctly. And then number 5, the benefits of getting it right the first time. Okay, so first, let's look at why is forming an LLC not the finish line, but really the starting point. Let's say you've gone out, you filed your LLC with the state, you've done all your internal documents, you've done everything that you need to do to get your LLC set up. Now what? Well, there's lots of assets that need to be contributed to your LLC for your LLC to be able to use them. For example, if your LLC is going to own a rental property, obviously the LLC needs to be the property owner and not you personally. But there's all kinds of other things that can go into it, especially if you've already been running your business. So if you've got computers, office equipment, if you've got trucks, anything like that, all those assets need to be moved from your personal name into the name of the LLC. You can't just form the LLC and have those things automatically transfer over. That's not the way it works. Each asset individually has to be contributed to the LLC, and there's certain documentation you have to do for certain types of assets. Obviously, if you own an asset free and clear, like a computer, transferring it to the LLC, it's pretty easy. If it's something that's financed, like a vehicle, it may be a little bit more difficult, and there's a different set of documents that belongs with that. It's really important to know that you can't just go out and form your LLC and be good to go. You have to be able to contribute the assets into the LLC for the liability shield. Okay, number 2, what happens when your assets stay in your personal name? Well, there's 2 parts of that. If the LLC assets stay in your personal name and you've not contributed to them to the LLC, the problem is that you may be using these assets to produce income from the LLC, and your clients, your customers, your creditors see that these assets are producing income from the LLC, but they're still titled in your personal name. That actually exposes you to personal liability for those creditors to come after those assets that you're using for the LLC that are in your personal name, also just personal liability in general. And one of the main reasons that you have formed an LLC is for liability protection. So you need to get those assets moved out of your personal name and into the LLC to make that clear distinction between LLC assets and personal assets, so nobody tries to hop over that LLC shield and claim your personal assets. And then vice versa, those assets, once they go into the LLC, in a lot of states, you're going to have the ability to protect those assets from your personal creditors. So let's say you've got a personal creditor that files a lawsuit against you on a personal matter, and they are not going to be able to hop immediately into the LLC and liquidate the LLC and take all the LLC's assets. Now, obviously, LLC law kind of depends on a state-to-state basis, so you would want to check with your attorney in your state as to whether or not that dual liability shield exists. But it is a great way in most states to be able to provide the liability protection for the LLC's assets from your personal creditors. So, doubly important to contribute all of those income producing assets, all the assets that the LLC is using for its business, into the LLC to protect them for your personal creditors and to protect you from having a personal liability claim filed against you. Okay, number 3, now we're going to talk about the assets that are most commonly forgotten to be contributed into your LLC. A lot of these things are things that you're going to have if you've already been doing business under your own personal name or maybe a DBA or assumed name, whatever your state calls it. If you've not formally set up an LLC, but you've already been doing business, say as a trial run, or you've been seeing some beta clients or something like that, you may have some of these assets. So you may have some of these clients that need to get transferred into your LLC in order for that liability shield to protect you. So the number one thing that you need to make sure that you get contributed into your LLC are existing contracts. So let's say you've got contracts with clients that you've already been servicing. You've already been doing deliverables for these clients under your own personal name. Now what you need to do is have the LLC fulfill those contracts to provide the liability shield to yourself and your personal property. So those contracts need to be what we call assigned to the LLC from you. Obviously, you're going to want to have a clause in your contract that allows for the assignment. What you're going to want to do is assign those contracts from your personal name to the LLC so the LLC can fulfill those contracts. And now the liability shield is in place. The next thing is digital assets. So what a lot of people will do before they set up an LLC is they'll go out and they'll register for a domain, they'll set up a website, they'll set up payment processors, social media handles, all of these sort of digital assets that they develop before they actually launch the business. And when they do that, they typically sign up for those things in their own personal name. All of those are going to be business assets, brand assets for the business, social media assets for the business. All of those things need to be assigned to the business once the LLC is up and running. So it's fine to go out and try to start getting all those things in advance so that you can kind of prep and have everything ready to go whenever you form your LLC. But before you start doing business, again, all of those assets need to be contributed to the LLC. The next one is big ticket physical assets. You're talking about equipment, vehicles, sometimes even real estate that people hold in their personal names instead of properly contributing that to the LLC. So if it's going to be an LLC asset that the LLC is going to be using it, producing income from it, needs to be contributed to the LLC, not only for obviously your tax purposes, your bookkeeping purposes, but also for your liability protection purposes. And we want to make sure that those big things are transferred over. Those are typically the more difficult things to transfer over because a lot of times you may have a lien and the bank may not want to approve a transfer from the personal owner to the LLC unless maybe you give a personal guarantee or sign up for some other documents to protect the lender in those situations. But it's really important for your liability protection, which your lender's not super concerned about. They're concerned about themselves, but for your liability protection, you want to make sure that your LLC's assets are properly contributed to the LLC. So how are courts and creditors going to look at these assets, especially if they haven't been properly contributed into the LLC? First, we'll look at contracts. Now, if the contract was signed with you personally before you had your LLC set up, then you personally are on the hook for that contract. And if something bad or something negative comes out of that contract, then you personally are on the line in a lawsuit. So it's really important to get that contract assigned over to the LLC to limit your personal exposure to personal liability. For intellectual property assets, it's also very similar. Creditors, courts are going to be looking at who is the registered owner of this intellectual property, who's the registered owner of this brand, of this website, of this social media page, and creditors can potentially use those things to try to hop over the liability shield if those assets are your personal assets and they're not the LLC's assets. So always want to get those contributed into the LLC. Likewise, with vehicles, equipment, with real property, anything like that. Again, the creditor is going to look at, well, whose name is on this? And so let's say, for example, with real property, if someone is staying at your real property and they hurt themselves, they're not going to say, oh, well, they have a separate LLC. They're going to say, who's the owner? Who's the record title holder to this property? And if it's you personally, there's a good chance that you personally are going to be on the hook in that lawsuit. So it's very important, again, get that property contributed to the LLC or get it structured in a different way to where your clients don't have that personal liability claim against you by using a really good contract. So the bottom line for what creditors and courts look at is, how is the asset titled? Who is the record title holder of that asset? Has it been properly contributed to the LLC, or is it in your personal name? And then they'll explore if a personal liability claim is available to them based on how you set it up. So it's important to set it up right the first time. Okay, now what are a few benefits to setting it up right on the front end rather than having to deal with it all later? Obviously, you don't want your personal assets to be on the hook in a personal liability claim. And likewise, you want to try to protect the business assets from personal creditors if possible. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a cleaner transition if you're going to sell the business. Let's say you've built this business up and now it's really valuable. You're looking to exit, sell it to someone. When they come in and start doing their due diligence, they're going to look at your paperwork and they're going to see what assets are on the books of the company, what liabilities are on the books of the company. And then if they see that the company doesn't own its own income producing assets or doesn't own its own intellectual property and that you actually own that, it may blow the deal altogether, or at the very minimum, it's going to make the deal a lot more complicated and expensive to deal with down the line. If you just set it up right in the first place, it will save you a lot of time and money later on. The last thing we'll say is that this is an easier process to accomplish the earlier you do it. So the more assets you stack up in your personal name before contributing to the LLC, it's just going to make things more and more complex and time consuming when it is time to do that. So the easiest solution is either put the assets in the LLC's name to start with, or if you're not able to do that, contribute them early on so that you don't have to go back later and fix all this paperwork. So as you can see, forming your LLC is just the starting point. There's still lots of other things, including the asset contribution and other things on top of that, that are really important to accomplish as soon as you start your LLC, because there could be really dire consequences down the line if you don't do it properly. Thanks for watching the video. If you're interested in business law topics, please take a look at the channel or take a look at our website. Thanks.